Under the greenwood tree. She fell asleep under the tree, but then she awoke. She was no longer there, for the tree had taken her for its own. The mother had sent her out early that morning to stop over the milk from turning. She had said. She had sent her watch over the geese, but they were annoying and boring, and worse than looking after the little ones. They barked and hooted, parading around in groups, and trying to run away or creep up and bite you. She hid out with the long, supple swish that she had stripped of its leaves, and shooed them back with the others, thinking all the time the village dance and the brown-haired boy. The sun broke through the mist. The dew underfoot started to dry, so she sat down under the tree for shade, picking the blades of grass and teasing the insects in the undergrowth. She practiced playing 5 stones with a handful of small pebbles she collected, but the games were no longer held the same attraction. Finally, as the sun grew warm and then hot, she laid down under a spread oak and slept. As she slept, the tree sent forth tendrils that crept inside her head and possessed her until she belonged to the forest. Roots entwined her and guided her through soft mosses and fragrant earth down into the depths. Cool green sap flowed through her veins. Her eyes took an emerald tint, sinews and tendons grew woody and strong. Still she slept, dreaming leafy green dreams. From time to time she awoke, merging into the light of day under a protective brow of the tree, and there she waited. The village lads and menfolk walked to forest paths she could. When the village lads and menfolk walked the forest paths she could but smile, as she had lost all knowledge of speech long years ago. But her eyes were wild and savage, and her lips full and inviting as autumn berries. And when the boy lay down with her under the spreading branch, the tree opened its trunk, peeling back bark, exposing the flesh underneath, all the better to welcome its prey. And once the visitor was firmly entwined, it feasted slowly and silently. The thing that had once been the girl returned to her place, nestling down among the roots until the next time the pangs of hunger made themselves felt. And so the years passed. We moved into the house in spring. Mother said it was a mistake, that we should wait and see the place in the rain first. The woman from the agency said it was a bargain and wouldn't stay in the market for long. And us? We were brought off with the promise of a tree house and ponies and room to run free. Mum was proved both right and wrong when the workmen found some sort of rot in the basement and started ripping out planks and beams. We were essentially banned from the house for the duration. We protested the form, but there were battles and exploration waiting in the meadow and the corpse, and anyway, all the wood piling up in the backyard would surely come in handy for the treehouse. Meanwhile, Dad hung tires from suitable branches, and we 3 children went native and brown. The spring turned into summer. It was Lucy who first spoke about the girl hiding in the corpse. Everyone else present at the table that evening took this for another of her imaginary friends. But now we were all used to her tea parties in an overturned box in the meadow where she poured tea and chatted with Rabbit and friends that only they could see. Then Vicky spied an emerald eye peering through the leaves. She ran into the kitchen. "There was something in the woods! There's something in the woods!" Mother peeped out of the window at the clump of trees at the far end of the field, screwing her eyes up against the sun. Finally she called for me to go and have a look for the prowlers. "Take the dog with you," she hollered. Mr. Saunders, our old yellow Labrador, was happy to spend his days sleeping on the back porch, twitching at flies and chasing rabbits only in his dreams. After all other attempts failed, I fastened a leash to his collar and dragged him down to the path we had worn through yellow grass and weeds. In my other hand, I clutched a cricket bat. Under the trees, everything was cool and green. Mr. Saunders lifted a leg half-heartedly at a bush, then barked as a breath of wind rustled in the leaves. I let him off the leash. He sauntered off before coming back and plumbing himself on the ground at my feet. The grass was shorter here, under the trees with occasional clump of bushes and brumples. There was no one to be seen. In the middle of the copse was the oldest tree, with gnarled, spreading branches and a great split in the bark. It looked like a good place for a treehouse. But Dad had said we shouldn't trust trees as old as this one. It could easily be hollow or rotten. I walked over. The dog's moist eyes followed me as he lay and panted. I felt the bark. It was rough and dry, but somehow warm to the touch. It certainly didn't look rotten. I tried to imagine the view from the canopy above. In my eyes, it seemed to be a fine choice, as the lowest branches were out of reach, and walking around the massive girth, the trunk didn't present any obvious handholds. I resolved to come back, but better equipped. I stroked the bark as I walked. Then I heard Mr. Sanders give out a long, low growl. Returning to the other side, I almost bumped into a young girl leaning against the tree. She was about my height, but the light through the leaves gave her a curious greenish tint. Her clothes were strange too. She appeared to be wearing layers of rags, coarsely woven from some sort of linen, in all shades of green. She smiled, a sad, distant smile, but not with her eyes. They remained dull and empty, the color of stagnant water. Yet somehow, the air was hot and sappy, while the girl seemed cool and fresh. I wanted to stay with that freshness. Before I could say anything, the dog growled again, then barked. "Shut up, you stupid!" I started before turning back to the girl to apologize and explain. Except she had gone. I darted back round the tree, then through the back of the corpse, but she was nowhere to be found. "It's all right," I called. "He's quite friendly, really." There was no answer, just the buzzing of bees in the meadow all around. We walked back to the house. I didn't need the leash from Mr. Saunders. He climbed up the steps and laid down at his place on the porch, and, exhausted by his walk, fell asleep. Inside the house, no one had seen anyone cross the meadow or the garden. It was as if the girl had never been there. But for the fact that now both my sisters and I had seen her. "She must be coming down from the village," said Dad. "Perhaps she liked coming up here when the house was empty." "Or a gypsy," said Mom. "You never know where they'll turn up, as they dress strange too." "But she didn't look like a gypsy. We'd certainly never seen her in the village." "She lives in the tree," said Lucy. "She told me." This was the Lucy who had tea parties for all her invisible friends. "Yes, of course," we all said, and Lucy went back to picking over the remains of her dinner. "She's lonely," said Lucy, the next evening when we were all gathered around the table. "I take it we're still talking about the girl who doesn't live up in the tree," said Dad, grabbing another mouthful of the fry-up. "Don't be silly, Daddy. Of course she lives in the tree." Around the table, we all looked at each other. Lucy was a girl of character, and didn't like to be contradicted. "Sorry," said Dad, through his munching. "That's all right," said Lucy. "She didn't really tell me she was lonely, but I felt it, even though she lives in the tree with lots of men." "Don't you dare say anything," said the look Mom shot across the table at Dad. He shrugged his shoulders and feigned innocence. "She didn't tell me about the men either, but I can hear them whispering." "Yes, dear," said Mom. "Finish up, and you can have your pudding." Can I take them some pudding?" asked Lucy, skipping deftly over Mum's attempt to change the subject. "Everyone likes pudding. It'll make them feel better." "Well," Mum said, "everyone likes pudding. Perhaps there won't be any left over." "Oh, they can have mine," said Lucy. How many are there? Asked Mom. 7, said Lucy. 7 was, in fact, the highest number she could count to, so it could mean 7 or 27. That won't leave much for each one, said Mom, barely a spoonful. Perhaps you better eat it yourself, after all. Lucy gave the idea some thought. Around the table, looks were exchanged, eyebrows raised. It was Mom's turn to shrug her shoulders. Only Vicky was concentrated on her meal. All right, said Lucy. After that, Dad fenced off the meadow, and Lucy was only allowed to play there when they were with her. But as it happened, there was a spell of rain that confined us to the house. The wet weather cleared, the sun dried everything in no time, already bleaching away the small patches of green that had started to reappear, and driving earthworms back underground. Lucy, of course, after days cooped up in the house with knocks and bangs echoing from the cellar, wanted to play in the meadow again. I grabbed a book to read in the shade. Wear a hat, Lucy, called Mum, as we set off, Mr. Sanders looking up as Lucy ran past. Lucy pottered around the grass, setting up her mismatched tea for a picnic. Insects buzzed around, just out of sight. As I sat reading, the warmth of the day seeped over the shade. I felt warm and languid, as if somebody had poured honey over me. I looked up, fearing I had dropped off, but Lucy was still there, peacefully playing in the field. Shifting my position, I found that green girl was sitting right next to me, looking at the meadow too. She was so close to her shoulder, we were now touching. I felt I ought to ask her a question. What was her name? Where'd she come from? How'd she get so close without hearing or feeling anything? But everything felt so good and warm and peaceful, I didn't want to break the spell. I could feel her next to me. I felt warmth and... She turned to me, giving me a curiously empty smile. I tried to smile back, but felt awkward and struck. Around us, the world receded, a hush fell, and everything became more distant, less important. The presence of the girl next to me was the only thing that mattered. She was warm and welcoming, and I wanted to fall into her arms. Mr. Saunders barked. I jumped up. The sun and light hit me. I swayed as black dots danced in front of my eyes. The dog barked again, urgently, as I rubbed my eyes and tried to follow something to hold on to. I fell back against the trunk of the old tree as the dog yapped. I pulled at my trainers. There was no sign of the girl, nor of Lucy. My ears were still ringing from the clout that Dad had whacked around my head when the police cars came piling up the lane to the house, raising columns of dust in the air. You were supposed to be looking after her, he had said, through clenched teeth before turning away. Hunched over a crackling radio, the plainclothes policeman with navy blue nylon jacket stretched over a pot belly, organized the hunt, and soon the fields were all full of search parties with dogs. The only trace that anyone found was a hem, ripped from Lucy's frock, that was firmly struck in the slit of an old tree. Dad ran back to the house and returned with a chainsaw. Sweating, red-faced, he jerked it to life and attacked the tree. Bystanders held arms over their eyes as bits and chips and fragments flew. All except the pot-bellied policeman who was wearing sunglasses. A great triangular gash appeared in the tree before the detective stepped forward, placing a hand on Dad's arm, gently moved him back, and waited while he silenced it. He pulled the safety cover back into place. Then he slowly shooed everyone out from the corpse while another policeman, in uniform this one, walked around the tree, enclosing them all in a bright yellow ribbon. They extracted 15 corpses from the tree in all. From the house, I watched the men lay them into black zipper bags before the vans carried them off. They were surprisingly intact. The doc says they're all young men, said the detective, knocking back the deer Dad had handed him, ice cold from the fridge. Funny thing is, he doesn't think they're recent, but not ancient either. Like a couple 100 years at the most. And to think they've been here all along, under our noses, like... Dad sighed. I'm sorry, But there's still no news of your little girl. The detective stifled a belch. Like she vanished off the face of the earth, as they say. He pulled his nylon jacket as he stood up, as if to zip it closed against the chill outside, but seemed to think better of it as his hands reached around his stomach. He shook Dad's hand, nodded at me, and walked out of his car where the for sale sign flapped in the wind. He drove away without looking back. Big, heavy drops of rain started to fall. The house was cold and damp and oppressive with packing cases stacked all over. Mom had been right, and you should always see the house in the rain before living there. The house never got sold. Even though the tree was gone, uprooted and excavated in the search for clues, everyone gave the place a wide berth. It became a rallying point for teens seeking a quiet spot to smoke and drink, as well as the vicarious thrill of being in such a spooky spot. But even they stopped coming, after one too many saw, in the half-light of dusk fell, 2 girls, one big, one small, in the grass at the end of the corpse, just sitting and looking out over the meadow. The end.